Hi, I'm Pat and welcome back to the channel. Today I have the rear diffuser off the back of the Acura NSX because I found some defects and I think I have a fix for them. If you're new to the channel, please click the subscribe button and ring that bell for notifications, as I like producing cool car content. And be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps. Today I'm talking about the Acura NSX Carbon Fiber Rear Diffuser. In the process of replacing the exhaust on the Acura NSX, I had to remove the rear bumper cover as well as the diffuser. This is a carbon fiber diffuser, and in the process of deciding to clean it up a little bit, I removed the exhaust outlet bezel here as well as the heat shields, and I discovered, well, a problem. Now, over the past couple days, I've decided to try to work on the problem myself, and I think I have a good solution. So I fixed half of the problem, and today I'm going to fix the other half on video. Now, what components I'm talking about are this little bezel here that is the exit for the exhaust. So this is made of metal, and it contains several tabs where you insert hardware. The same is true with these heat shields. These go underneath the mufflers so that the heat from the muffler doesn't impact the carbon fiber. So, once I removed all of these pieces, I found the problem. Now, to hold these pieces on, there are these little coarse screws and washers, and they're screwed into plastic pieces. So over here is the side I haven't worked on yet. This is the side I've been doing some testing on. Of course, these mounts here I've also been testing on. And what happens is these plastic mounts everywhere become brittle and they crack due to heat. Let's take a closer look. These are plastic mount points, and on the plastic mount point, if you can see, they're cracked. There's a crack that runs through the plastic here, and what ends up happening is, in some cases, that plastic completely leaves the diffuser and there's no replacement for it. So these cracks, what I've learned, run mainly through the entire piece here. Now, there is some epoxy around the outside on both sides, but there's no epoxy where the fins are in the diffuser. And that means that over time there's really nothing to support this, and of course the heat impacts this and it cracks. And the same was true for these mount points that hold on, that bezel that goes around the exhaust exit. So what I did is I actually got some JB Weld and I surrounded them so that I can cover the cracks and support them better, because I really don't have a good fix for this. If somebody comes up with a better idea, either using a metal bracket or possibly 3D printing a replacement for these, that would be awesome, but I think plastic is still going to have the same problem. Let's take a look at the other side. Now, here's where I actually made some fixes. First off, I just took JB Weld and I piled it on top of the middle of this plastic mounting point to try to cover up all the cracks as best I could. But obviously, because the crack is still underneath that JB Weld, it's possible that it may end up coming through this epoxy or going around it at some point. So I want to lay some epoxy down more on the sides here to give the center some extra support. Of course, you can see it's kind of dull there because I sanded the top of it because I had some epoxy coming up through and I wanted to make it flat just like it was from factory. So these look pretty sloppy, and like I said, I just wanted to test them out just to see what I could do. Now, in the case of this guy right here, where there is no replacement, there's no way to build up epoxy here, I decided to, in this case I had the same problem over here. I decided to take a bolt and a washer and replace it with this so that this sticks up through the heat shield. Now, I did have to take my Dremel and cut away this plastic in order to make room for this, but with some JB Weld underneath it, I was then actually able to get it to replace broken one of these, and this actually works pretty well because once you take that top nut off of there, it sits within the recesses of those heat shields over there. So this is actually, in my opinion, a good fix. Now let's talk about these guys a little bit more because I had plenty of plastic here, and it was mainly only cracked and falling apart. In fact, the screws were holding some of that plastic, and as I took the screw out, it fell apart. It just is that brittle. There are other mounts which are up here. Let me flip the diffuser over and I'll show you what I'm talking about, the situation that I have going on there. So here's one of the mounts. This mount does not glue down to this part of the carbon fiber diffuser. It glues inside here. So this was flopping around, like literally up and down with a crack. So I completely surrounded it and I put some epoxy back here and over here in order to reinforce it. So that's now strong. And I had a worse problem over here, and I still have a problem here, and this is why I'm creating this video, is to talk about what I'm going to do for this fix. So this piece right here on the top was completely gone, and I epoxied it back into place, but it's missing a piece. This literally fell off the car. I have no way of replacing that piece of plastic at all. And what I've read online is I can actually put epoxy there, and I could take the screw and put some wax or something on the screw and run the screw in here with the epoxy here. And once the epoxy cures, I can still back the screw out because, of course, there's some wax on the screw, so the epoxy won't stick to the screw. So that might be what my fix is, or I could just leave it as is because I've got, I don't know, maybe 70% of the plastic there. I could probably just screw into here and not have a problem. But I think it's wise to try to epoxy the rest of it for longevity. Of course, this is gray, and you'll probably see it from the back of the car here. And the best thing to do would be to put some black paint on this. So I think that's probably what I'm going to do in order to finish it off. But let's go to the other side of the diffuser for now. So what I did on this side of the diffuser is I vacuumed out all of the different blades. And of course, I didn't start that on this side. I wanted to start fresh. So there's all kinds of debris in here, rocks and all kinds of stuff. I mean, you literally got to get a screwdriver in here in order to pry at some of these. So I'm going to vacuum them out off camera and revisit this once that's all cleaned up. And before I get too far ahead, people may ask, Pat, why don't you just let Acura fix this? Well, I did post to the second generation Acura NSX owners group on Facebook. That group is for owners only. You got to provide proof that you're an owner. And folks that have also, found these same defects had taken the car back to a dealer, and the dealer said, well, you could have impacted something with the underside of your diffuser because it sits so low. You're going to have some marks under there. You probably caused this. We can't prove that you didn't, but we're not going to cover the replacement. You can't buy these individual pieces separately. You have to buy the whole diffuser, and we'll gladly, pay 50%. That means you pay the other $5,500. So this is too expensive to replace for just these simple little plastic pieces that are broken. And because we can't acquire replacement plastic pieces, which are just going to break again anyway, this seems to be the only fix that is not only inexpensive, but should be more long-lasting, obviously when we use metal pieces and epoxy, than the plastic that's currently here. Also, this material, it is printed on here PC plus PBT. This is a common material that is used in 3D printing, so I don't know if a 3D printed replacement is really a smart idea. This seems to be the fix that I think will last the longest, and that's why I'm going ahead and doing it here. All right, now that I've gone ahead and vacuumed out all the debris that I can get out, I want to clean everything up. So I'm just going to take some 91% alcohol, and I'm just going to spray it on everything. And this will give me the ability to get a clean enough surface for the epoxy to stick to. And in case of this one here, I'm actually going to Dremel it out, so I'm not going to bother. Now I've gone ahead and wiped these down after I've sprayed some alcohol in them, and I'm already seeing some are already falling, more are falling apart. It's kind of crazy. As soon as you touch them, they're just shattering. Now I could also see there are lines in here. I don't know if you could tell on camera, but there are lines, really hair lines there that run away and into different parts of this plastic mount. So these are really in bad shape. I'm definitely going to need to apply a lot of epoxy, but I'm going to be replacing this one here with the bolt and the washer as I did over here. So that means I'm going to get my Dremel out, and once I do that, I can cut away enough of an area around here. But let me show you more about the bolt and the washer that I'm going to use. So I bought 1/4 inch 20 thread by 5/8 inches tall flathead Phillips screws. So it is a flat head. It's not curved, it's completely flat, and that is 5/8 inches tall. I then picked up these fender washers. These have a 1/4 inch hole in them, and I can just place that fender washer over that, place this bolt over the, or this nut over the top of this screw, and then after I place the heat shield on top, I'm going to use another one. Now for the epoxy that I picked up JB Weld, and this takes a long time to cure, but it's good to 500 degrees Celsius. So I know that the heat that's going to be coming off of the exhaust and through these heat shields should not break down this JB Weld. So I'm going to go through the process, but first let me go ahead and take the Dremel tool and start to remove as much of this material as I can so that I have enough room for this washer to fit in it. So I'm wearing protective eye covering and a mask right now, and this is my old school Dremel. I got this many years ago. I don't know what this attachment is called, but I'll link in the description if I can find it. And I'm going to use that in order to cut a circle through this so I have the ability to place that washer. I just made a couple cuts here to see if I can make it easy to remove this. I think it should actually snap right out of place. There you go. You can actually see it breaking in half. How about that? Okay, so I got the initial pieces out of here. Anything that is stuck to this epoxy is going to be there pretty much forever. So I'm going to now use the tool this way because it has grinding ability on the very tip of it, and then form my circle. All right, so just a quick test fit. Yeah, there's plenty of room there. I got rid of a lot of material. Next, I'm going to take this fender washer, and I'm just going to use my file on it in order to try to score it so that the JB Weld 6 sticks to it better. And I'm going to do the same on the head of the bolt as well. Now that I've scored these pieces up, I can go ahead and start to put them together with, of course, the scored parts down. And then I could take one bolt and then place it on the other side. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this into my vise and then tighten it down as much as I can so there's no movement here. Now that we have our screw and our washer and our nut assembled and tightened, it's ready to go. Of course, it's going to be here, but I'm not going to lay it in here. I'm going to mount it to the actual heat shield itself. And that's because I can use the heat shield as a template in order to install it in the proper place. As you can see, there are a couple holes down here, and one of those holes lines up with this hole. There's a bolt that goes through here, so it's a strong bolt. That way, even if all these other things break, it won't really go flying off the car. So we're going to go ahead and line that up. So we got this bolt, and I know that lines up with this bolt. But also, there are a few pegs that are built into these mounts, and you can see there's double holes, and that's for a screw and a peg. So we can go ahead and try to get this lined up the best way we can in the pegs. There we are. So now we can move this around. It's not really going to go anywhere. So I can go ahead and now install the screw and the washer here and use this as a template to make sure that that screw and that washer ends up exactly where I want it to on the other side. So now that we have this washer and this screw installed here, you can see how it's offset. So none of this epoxy is going to touch the heat shield. We can go ahead and line up our holes, and you can see there we are, we're lined up perfectly. And if we push in, we're getting some rocking here, which is good because that means that there's a small gap between the washer and the diffuser. And in fact, if we look over on this side, Don't know if you can catch that on the camera or not, but over here on this side there's a gap, and over here of course it's touching because the angle that's here is of course not perfect. It's not exactly the same as the angle here on the heat shield. So I believe it's important that once the epoxy is applied to the back side of this, that other bolts are installed into some of these other holes where they will be able to help hold and support this, which means that all these other cracked pieces need to have epoxy applied to them. Now in the process of me cleaning things up, I broke more. They literally just fell apart. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing that I did with this one, which is to go ahead and remove the material from here and here as well. And I'll have some more hardware that I'm going to attach to here so that I don't have to ever worry about these types of things. I don't just want to epoxy this up and put a screw in it. It could be the fix that I decide to use, but I don't like doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and also remove material from here, and then start to apply epoxy to these other pieces. Now for these individuals here that are not broken, where I could actually add a screw with no problem, I'm going to go ahead and start to epoxy these. While that is curing, I can then Dremel these out and prepare for the next step. So in order to do that, I have my JB Weld here. I'm going to use a piece of cardboard, a popsicle stick, and then I'm going to use toothpicks in order to apply the JB Weld to the areas that are cracked first, because I do want to make sure that I have enough material on those, and then I can add more and spread more out to the sides. And then I'll use the popsicle stick in order to mix the two together the best that I can until it turns a gray color. So I'm just going to take some of my epoxy here on the end of my toothpick, and I'm going to try to cover all the areas that I could see are obviously cracked first in order to provide them with some strength and reinforcement. Okay, so I went ahead and finished up putting all the epoxy on everything and let it cure overnight. And then I took a file and filed down the tops of these so that the heat shield would sit flush. I also finished up doing that to the other side here, so now this is all prepped and ready to go. But I ran into a little bit of a problem. Now, this was originally all I was going to replace, but in the process of cleaning things up, this one and this one, they just cracked and fell apart, and I couldn't get a hold of the pieces in time when I was cleaning things up, so they ended up in the vacuum. So I'm not going to bother trying to hunt down those pieces and try to repair them like this. I'm actually just going to go ahead and replace them with the bolt and the washer. But in this case, I wanted to retain this little peg right here, because both of these pegs allow this heat shield to be lined up properly. So I just cut this portion out. So let me show you what I have going on now. I decided to take just the bolt and a small washer and just notch it out so that you can get to the little peg. But I did install the bolts and the washers completely up here in the top, and I also filed them to make sure that they're scored very well so that they hold the epoxy. And of course there's a standoff now because there's a nut on there, and everything lines up perfectly fine. So the plan is, once I apply epoxy to the back side of this, I'm going to line up the hole here, and I know that there's a hole right in there, and then I could just drop it right into place. So here's our other peg. It's coming through here just fine. And then we can also see that these holes here line up for the screws. So once this is sitting down, of course, it's perfectly fine. It's not wobbling or anything. Then I could take these 3 Phillips head screws and put them in here, here, and here, and then let this sit overnight. So that's the plan. I just want to make a big dollop on each side. And I don't really want any running down underneath, which is what I'm getting right now. I have a little bit of an excess, which I didn't realize I was doing until I started seeing it run. So I just grabbed another popsicle stick here. The nice thing is it seems to want to stick to itself, so it's easy to pile it up here. But I'll go ahead and apply some to this as well. So here's all of our epoxy in place. I'm just going to flip this over. Going to line up the holes where they need to be. There we go. Everything's lined up, and then I'm going to go ahead and install the Phillips head screws. I'm just picking the diffuser up, and I could see everything looks like it's exactly where it needs to be. I can see, without the camera here, I can actually see that the epoxy is resting exactly where I want it to on each of these. So this is good to go. Now this can sit overnight with no problem. Now let me address what's been going on with these here. So I've already encapsulated these with epoxy, but I believe there's one on the underside of one of these here that is actually has a hole in it or a crack in it. And I found the piece of plastic that I need to put in there. So I'm going to epoxy that into place while I still have some leftover epoxy. So right here there's a missing piece, and I now remembered that I had saved this piece. So it's just going to sit right in here. Now I did get some extra epoxy in there. So I did take a little bit of a razor blade and just nip it down a little bit. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a little bit of epoxy along the edges here. I don't need a whole lot because I don't want to create a huge gap. I want this to be able to encapsulate the entire area. Okay, let's take this piece, lay it into place like so, and then I'm going to go ahead and apply some epoxy to the outside of this crack. Actually, I'm going to apply epoxy over the entire thing because I don't want any of this to crack. There we go. All right, so that's completely covered, and that's looking good. That will be a good repair. Same as this one. It's too bad that I have to make these kind of repairs, but it is what it is. So I'll let this sit overnight and cure. Okay, it's already the next day, and I've gone ahead and released all the nuts and screws, and give you a closer look at what it looks like underneath here now. You can see here's our little screw, and it's actually at a steeper angle than the actual carbon diffuser, and that's because, of course, we used the heat shield as a template. So here are our screws with the large fender washers. They're clearly very strong, as well as all these other screws. So this is pretty much ready for assembly. What I'm going to do is apply a little bit of Loctite to each of these. That way, in case there's any vibration or the heating and cooling, that the nut doesn't back off. I don't really want to put a lock washer on there. I don't think it's necessary because I don't see myself taking these back off probably for a very long time. There's also another bolt that's here. I believe this is a T30, maybe, I can't remember. And this is a 10 millimeter nut that sits on here. So once everything is reassembled and some Loctite is applied to this, of course, this is all going to be ready to go. Now I do want to talk about the bezel that sits in here. Of course, it's going to sit in this direction, and there are also coarse screws that screw into these 4 positions, and then there's 2 holes right here, and there are no bolts that go up into the actual surround itself and bolted in. Those holes are actually underneath the car. So they're underneath this little hanger here that hangs underneath the exhaust. So that's where these will bolt up into there in order to hold these. So here's our bezel, and up here at the top are 4 holes. The little silver holes are for the little tabs that are here. So I can line these up with the tabs. Here we are. And then I can go ahead and start running the screws in. Okay, so everything is tight now, and of course there is still an opportunity for our bolts to come up underneath and then connect to the bumper itself. And of course, here we are on the other side, and we could still see that gray epoxy. Now I'm just going to go ahead and use a little bit of paint and cover that epoxy up just to make sure that it is less visible. I just have some black touch-up paint, just a standard black, and I believe that this will dress it up just nicely, and it'll be a little bit less obvious to see from behind because, yeah, you're going to see a little bit of gray there. I'm sure the darkness underneath the car, underneath the bumper, is going to make it a little bit harder to see it, but I want to make sure that it looks good. So if you like today's video, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please click the subscribe button and ring that bell for notifications, as I like producing cool car content. Thanks for watching, and happy motoring. So this is Pat from the future, and this installation went really well. Obviously, I got back under the car and reattached all of the hardware, and everything lined up really perfectly, as you can see here in this video. Now, I had sold the car already, so it's really been 3 years. I've driven it that entire time, and the exhaust sounded amazing, and everything held up so well.